Every creature on Earth has developed a way to communicate emotions, thoughts, and desires. For example, pet owners know when their dogs or cats want to go out or when they are hungry. But what sets humans apart from the rest of the animal kingdom is our unique ability to use a formal language. Our language helps us to think critically, collaborate with others, brainstorm ideas, and convey a specific meaning as we plan, organize, and execute important projects. In this article, we'll discuss Roman Jacobson's functions or factors that all languages need in order to communicate effectively. Who is Roman Jacobson? So, Roman Jacobson was a linguist who studied the structure of language and was particularly interested in the difficulties that appear in many languages. He was one of the pioneers in structural linguistics, which in the theory that language is a structured system of interrelated formal units. Structural linguistics analyze how units such as words structure, sentences, syntax, and phonetics relate to each other. Jacobson's theory of communication. The word communication comes from the Latin word communicare, which means to share or to be relation with. This makes sense because sharing and relation sort of form the basis of communication. You need at least one person to share information and at least one person to receive the information, to participate in the communication process. Well, there are 6 factors of communication. It is according to Jacobson in his theory. First, it is the addresser, which this is the person who delivers a message to a specific audience. The addressee, this is the audience that receives the message, must consist of at least one person but not include many people. The context. The context forms the settings or the reason for the message that will be communicated. Contact. There needs to be a relational channel and connection between the addresser and the addressee. This connection keeps the line of communication open. The common code. The code includes the rules that combine to form the message and correspond to the type of language used. And lastly, the message. The message is what is said by the addresser and correspond to an experience, idea, explanation, and so on. Basically, these factors work together to enable the communication process. They are the steps to successful communication, which look like this. First, every communication includes a sender and a receiver, which is the addresser and the addressee. Second, the sender establishes the context of the message so it can be understood. These include the environment it is given, the condition, and where and when the message is given. It can also include the potential for interference during the communication. Third, the addresses give feedback to the addressers during and after the delivery of the message. This establishes the contact that keep the communication channel open. Feedback can be verbal or nonverbal, such as nodding, agreement, or stating that the message is understood. And lastly, to make the communication clear and easier to understand, a communication code is used. For example, developers working in agile environment understand Scrum, iteration, and stand-up meetings. In Jacobson's theory of functions, which communication that includes sixth function of language, we will mainly focus on the phatic and metalingual language. Thus, I also include the other four functions of language in Jacobson's theory, but we will mainly focus only in the phatic and metalingual. Referential. Referential is one of the main functions of language, is sharing information with an audience. This is the language you use to convey information in an objective way. For example, sales are up 3% this quarter. This represents a referential, thus the function of the language is to give and share information to the audience. Next function is emotive function, that is also called expressive. This function helps us to interpret emotion, feelings, desire, and mood of the subject. The emotive function gives us direct information about the sender's tone. For example, I'm excited about the new car I bought. It represents an expressive function of language. Thus, it interprets emotions of the messenger. Conative function. This function focuses on the receiver of the message. The language used with this function is meant to get the attention or the reaction from the addressee. For example, can you show John where to find the paper clips? For this example, it represents the function with this meant to get the attention or the reaction of the addressee. Poetic function. This is also known as the aesthetic function of language. This function focuses on the message as well as the way the message is communicated. This means that the message might be embellished with rhetorical figures of speech or flowery language. You will find the poetic function in quotations and colloquial sayings. For example, it is far, far better than think that I do, than I have ever done. It is far better rest than I go to than I have ever known. The phatic function. Phatic function is used to establish a social connection without really communicating any meaningful information. This type of language is used to start up or to start or to stop a conversation or to check the connection between the sender and the receiver. For example, how are you? I'm fine. See you later. An example of research in phatic communication on how English native speakers create ties of union. So, this research article is about phatic communication among English native speakers, about how the native speakers create ties of union. The article is based on the writer's elaborative qualitative research on Malinowski's theory of phatic communication. First, in Jacobson's theory of language function and Brown and Gleeman's theory of power and solidarity. The primary data are obtained from the interviews to 9 native speakers with different dialects of American English, British English, and Australian English. The research findings shows that the function of phatic communication among English native speakers and the types of expression they use for creating ties of union. The phatic communication among English native speakers is then related to politeness and is also verified by other significant theories in verbal human communication. So, this paper was cited by Human to Phatic Communication, How English Native Speakers Create Ties of Union, an American Journal of Linguistics in the year 2014 and Volume 3. So, the theoretical framework of phatic communication includes Malinowski's phatic communication, and then Baller's three language functions, which are the expressive, appellative, representative, that go down into Jacobson's six language of function, which are emotive, connotative, referential, phatic, metalingual, and phoetic, where phatic is the main focus of the theoretical framework of phatic communication in this chart. So, in phatic communication, it includes Richard et al., Leach, Cook, Holmes, Credlaxina, Sullivan, Rikema, Schriffen, Abercrombie, Verschachen, Copeland, May, and Chokey. And it goes down into the 12 function of phatic communication. It includes breaking the silence, stating a conversation, making small talk, making gossip, keeping talking, expressing solidarity, creating harmony, creating comfort, expressing empathy, and expressing friendship, expressing respect, and lastly, expressing politeness. For the conclusion, this research on phatic communication among English native speakers is far from being perfect. Other important findings are probably not yet revealed. Several points to bring to an end are presented as follows. First, a further research on phatic communication among English native speakers, which involve close equal, heavy, and not close equal hearers of Brown and Gleeman's theory. Second, field observation in phatic communication among English native speakers can be conducted to verify on test some of all findings to this research. Third is that the result of this research on phatic communication among English native speakers can be used as guidelines for English language learners to create as well as to maintain a good social relationship with English native speakers that they meet or deal with, so that the offers or efforts can support this further verbal communication with the native speakers. And lastly, the metalingual function of language. Meta is basically defined as self-awareness. So, metalingual refers to talking about the language itself, its features, word definitions, clarifying ambiguity, and describing deliberate word play or metalingual functions. The metalingual functions is also relevant in translation in foreign words are used to give a special meaning or emphasis. For example, I couldn't help but feel a touch of Schadenfreude, a sense of pleasure or joy from the failure of other, when the other team lost by 50 points. For a given example, it really observe that metalingual function of language is basically can be seen as it defined as self-awareness. It refers to talking the language itself and features. Another thing, since metalingual function language refers to the self-referential use of language. For an example, in the sentence, snow has 4 letters. Language is being used to talk about itself. That is, this is a metalingual function, as opposed to snow is white, in which we are actually talking about snow.